expressed hope that a deal could be reached to lower tariffs on Swiss exports to the United States. Swatch also announced having transferred significant stock to the US with 3 to 6 months of inventory already in place. In response to the US-Swiss trade dispute, the CEO called on the Swiss president to travel to Washington to negotiate a solution. This comes after the US set a tariff rate over double the EU average, impacting Swiss industries like watches and pharmaceuticals. US President Trump, citing a $40 billion deficit with Switzerland, insists the issue of trade balance is key. Swiss officials have expressed disappointment over the failure to finalise a previous agreement. Well, with us to discuss trade as a whole, but also the situation between Switzerland and the US, Jajit Bhattacharya, an economist and finance expert. Thank you very much for joining us today, Jajat. Let's look at this situation. The Swatch CEO, of course, making a point and hopeful that a deal could be reached to potentially lower the tariffs. But Switzerland, an outlier in the continent of Europe, with that trade imbalance, a key point that Trump has said in imposing higher tariffs. How do you think this will play out?
You know, you must look at the context in which the Swatch CEO is talking about. After the bottoms have taken off from the Chinese market for luxury products, which includes luxury watches, US is the single largest market for Swatch and for Swiss watches. In fact, between 2021 and 2024, 43% of growth for Swatch came from the US market. So it's very critical for them to be able to continue to access the US market. And if tariffs such as the 41% or 44% that has been put on the Swiss products which are landing up in US, then that becomes very difficult for the Swiss watches because they're already very expensive. The Swatch watches go anywhere between $10,000 to over $100,000. And to be able to increase the price by 40% is a tall order. So they will end up losing significant market in the US, unless obviously if they move production from Switzerland to other parts of Europe, which has got a more favorable deal with the US, which is a 15% tariff, rather than the usurious tariff that Switzerland is facing. So it's in this context that there is a sense of urgency from the Swatch CEO requesting their president to step in order to save the Swiss industry, because a large part of the market is the US market.
Yes, absolutely. And looking at Trump's broader tariff action, of course, there are many countries which have been hit with higher rates. Do you think that the conversations happening between Switzerland and US officials could set a precedent for those countries that aren't happy with the rates that have been imposed, where deals haven't yet been agreed, with both countries happy?
It really depends on what the conversation will be between the US negotiators and the Swiss government, because for example, if you look at the EU-US trade deal, that's not much of a precedent. They have agreed to having all imports from US at zero tariff, and their exports to US will be tariffed at 25%. So clearly that's not a viable template. So it really depends on what comes out of that conversation. If it's a fair deal, then obviously that will be a template. If it's not, then that's a sad case, because overall consumption globally will fall, and that will lead to the reduction in the global GDP. It will lead to the reduction of the US GDP and the Swiss GDP. So it's a lose-lose situation that will unravel if we do not have a fair agreement between the Swiss government and the US government.
Jajit Bhattacharya, as always, a